I was sipping my coffee on my deck, savoring the calm of the morning on my private property. The air was cool, the birds were singing, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed just right. That serenity didn't last. As I leaned back to take another sip, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the peace. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing here?" I turned to see a woman standing in my backyard like she owned it. She had a telltale look, short, choppy hair, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and a face brimming with self-righteous indignation. I'd heard tales of people like her, the notorious Lindis of the world, but I'd never faced one in person until now. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady but firm. "This land is for everyone," she snapped. "You can't just sit here acting like it's yours." I blinked, trying to wrap my head around her gall. "I do own it. This is private property." She scoffed, planting her hands on her hips. "That's impossible. I've lived around here for years, and this has always been open space. No one can just buy it." Standing up, I set my coffee down. "Actually, I did buy it. I've got the deed, the paperwork, everything. If you'd like proof, I can show you. But you're trespassing, and I need you to leave." Linda didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "I don't believe you. People like you waltz in, thinking you can claim what's always belonged to the community. I walk here every morning. You can't stop me." I let out a sharp breath, feeling a headache brewing. That's not how private property works. There are signs posted saying, "No trespassing." You've seen them. "I don't care about your signs," she shot back. "You can't tell me what to do." Her confidence was unreal. I'd dealt with difficult neighbors before, but this was a new breed of arrogance. Taking a deep breath, I tried one last time to keep things civil. "Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just asking you to respect my land and go." She folded her arms. "And if I don't?" I stared at her, momentarily floored. Was she seriously challenging me on my own property? My patience was fraying. "Then I'll call the police," I said flatly. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought she'd back off. But then she did something that left me speechless. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'll call them first," she declared, pressing it to her ear. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Here I was, on my legally owned land, being accused of trespassing by an intruder. "Yes, officer, I need help," she began, launching into an Oscar-worthy act. "There's a strange man harassing me on public property. He's aggressive and won't leave." I shook my head, incredulous. She was painting me as the villain, flipping the entire situation. "Please send someone fast. I don't feel safe," she added, her voice dripping with smugness. I rolled my eyes. She didn't feel safe? She was the one refusing to leave my land. But there was nothing to do now except wait for the cops to sort it out. Linda hung up and smirked at me. "You're in deep trouble. The police don't take kindly to people like you bothering residents." I exhaled, staying calm. "You know this is going to backfire, right?" She chuckled. "We'll see." Minutes later, sirens approached. Linda stood there, arms crossed, looking far too pleased with herself. I was annoyed but confident. The law was on my side, and she'd soon find out how wrong she was. A police cruiser pulled up, and an officer stepped out, scanning the scene before walking over. "What's the problem here?" he asked. Before I could speak, Linda swooped in dramatically. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man's harassing me, refusing to leave, and claiming this land is his." The officer turned to me, sizing me up. "Sir, is that true?" I took a breath and reached into my pocket. "No, officer. This is my property. I have all the documents to prove it." Linda's smirk wavered for a moment, but she quickly rallied. "He's lying," she shrieked. "This has always been public land. He's an outsider trying to steal it from the community." The officer glanced between us, his face neutral. "All right, let's take this step by step. Sir, can I see your proof?" I handed him my deed without hesitation. "Here's everything. It's all legit." Linda leaned in, trying to peek. "That could be fake," she spat. The officer reviewed the papers, nodding after a moment. "Looks legitimate to me." Linda's face flushed. "That doesn't mean anything. Just because he's got papers doesn't mean this isn't for the neighborhood." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, do you have proof this is public land?" She stammered. "Well, no, but everyone knows it is." He shook his head. "That's not how property law works. If he owns it and asks you to leave, you're trespassing. Linda gasped, stepping back like she'd been slapped. Excuse me. You heard me, the officer said firmly. You need to leave now. Her world was unraveling, and she couldn't handle it. This is outrageous, she yelled. You're taking his side? I'm enforcing the law, he replied. Leave, or I'll have to take further action. I watched as Linda stood there, fists balled, face twisted in fury. For a second, I thought she'd argue more, but the officer's tone finally sank in. With a loud huff, she spun around and stormed off, shouting, "This isn't over," as she went. I shook my head. Somehow, I don't doubt that. The officer handed my papers back and sighed. Sorry about that. Some folks don't get boundaries. Yeah, I noticed, I said, pocketing the deed. As he drove off, I sat back down, picking up my now cold coffee. I had a hunch Linda wouldn't let this go. She'd be back, and the real trouble was likely just starting. Sure enough, she was lingering near my property line minutes later, arms crossed, phone in hand, plotting her next move. I sighed, bracing myself for whatever she'd try next. She squared her shoulders and marched back onto my land like nothing had happened. I was still on my deck, watching in disbelief as she strode toward me, her face sour enough to spoil milk. You think you've won, huh? She sneered. Well, I've got news for you. That cop didn't know what he was talking about. I know my rights, and this land isn't yours. I set my coffee down and stood. Linda, I'm not doing this again. The officer verified my ownership. Leave before you get into real trouble. She laughed dramatically, tossing her head back. Oh, please. You think I'm scared of a little warning? That cop was probably in your pocket. I'll make sure you regret this. I've got connections, people who'll get you out of here fast. I raised an eyebrow. Connections? Like who? She faltered for a split second, then tossed her hair. The homeowners association, for one. They'll want to hear about this. I chuckled. Linda, I'm not in an HOA. This is private land, not part of any neighborhood. Her face twitched, but she pressed on. Doesn't matter, they still have power around here. I'll tell them you're causing problems. And if that fails, I'll call the city and report you for illegal land use. I crossed my arms, now more amused than irritated. Illegal land use? You're reaching. If I were breaking any rules, that officer would have said so. Go ahead, call whoever. I've got nothing to hide. She glared, clearly thrown by my calm demeanor. Before I could react, she yanked out her phone and dialed again. I rubbed my temples as she paced, speaking loud enough for me to hear every word. Yes, hello. I need to report an aggressive man threatening residents and blocking public access to community land, she said, shooting me a smug look. He claims he owns it, but I know it's always been open to everyone. He even tried intimidating me with the police, but I won't be bullied. I watched, unimpressed, as she spun her tale. I had no clue who she'd called, but she was clearly milking it. She hung up and grinned. You're done now. I sighed. Who'd you call this time? The police again, she said smugly. But this time, I made sure they know the real story. I rolled my eyes and sat back down, letting it play out. She'd called the cops on me just 20 minutes ago. Likely the same officer would show up. Sure enough, the same cruiser pulled up, and the same officer stepped out, looking confused and irritated. Ma'am, you called us again? He asked, exasperation clear in his voice. Linda launched into her act. Officer, I had to. He's still here, refusing to leave, and he's getting worse. I don't feel safe. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, we've been through this. This is his property. He owns it. You're trespassing. But it's not fair, she cried, stomping her foot. This land's always been open to everyone. That's not how property laws work, he said, clearly fed up. I've told you this. If you keep trespassing, you'll face consequences. Her arrogance cracked. You can't be serious. You're threatening me? I'm informing you of the law, he replied. Leave, or I'll have to escalate this. Linda's face twisted with rage and panic. She wasn't used to losing, and now, facing real repercussions, she didn't know what to do. You know what, she spat. I don't need this right now, but this isn't over. She stormed off, muttering about the injustice of it all. The officer shook his head and turned to me. Sorry you're dealing with this. Some people don't know when to stop. Yeah, I've noticed, I said. What if she comes back? Call us immediately, he replied. If she won't leave, she could be arrested for trespassing. I thanked him, and he drove off. I sat down, picking up my cold coffee. Linda wasn't done. I knew that much, but at least I had a plan if she tried again. For now, I'd won, though I doubted it was the end. The next morning, I woke to a strange noise from the side of my property. At first, I thought it was an animal, but stepping onto my deck, I saw Linda with a man in a cheap suit, flipping through a folder while she pointed aggressively at my land. I took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be good. As I approached, Linda smirked. "Well, look who's here." I ignored her and addressed the man. "Can I help you?" He adjusted his tie. "Good morning, sir. I'm Robert Hayes, with local zoning and property regulations. I got a complaint about unauthorized land use, and I'm here to check it out." I glanced at Linda, who was beaming. "Let me guess, she filed it." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I can't say who, but I have to follow up on reports." Linda rocked on her heels. "That's right. You thought you could claim this land, but the city's involved now. Let's see how long you last." I stayed calm. "All right, Robert, what's the complaint?" He read from his folder. "It says you've unlawfully claimed public land, blocked access to an open space, and possibly violated zoning rules." I sighed. "That's nonsense. I own this land legally. I've got all the documents." Robert nodded. "If you've got proof, I'd like to see it." I pulled out my phone, showing him the scanned deed. "Here's everything. Purchase was legal, land's in my name, no zoning issues." He scrolled through, reviewing it carefully as Linda's smirk faded. "Well?" she demanded. Robert looked up. "It's all in order. This is private property, no violations here." "What?" Linda blurted. "That can't be right. This has always been open." "Ma'am," Robert said, "I get that it might have been used that way before, but it's his now. Legally, there's nothing wrong." Linda's fists clenched. "So you're letting him get away with this?" "There's nothing to get away with," Robert replied. "He owns it. Case closed." I smirked as Linda's plan fell apart. She sputtered, "I don't care what papers say. This is wrong, and I won't stand for it." Robert shook his head. "Sorry for the trouble, sir. There's nothing to investigate." He gave an awkward nod and left, Linda glaring at me like I'd ruined her life. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "I think it's funny you keep trying and failing," I said. Her face turned crimson. "You don't know who you're messing with. I'll make your life hell, just wait." I rolled my eyes. "You've tried the police and the city. What's next?" She didn't answer, just stormed off. Robert trailed after her, probably regretting his career choice. I'd won again, but Linda wasn't done. She was too stubborn to quit. That night, I checked my security cameras and added motion-activated lights near the entrance. If she came back, I'd have proof. Barely finished, I heard a noise outside. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto my deck and saw it. A crude cardboard sign in my yard. "This land belongs to the people. We won't be silenced." I sighed, tossed it in the trash, and went inside. She wasn't scaring me off, but this was just the start of her next stunt. The next morning, hammering woke me up, too early for construction. Rushing outside in pajamas, I saw Linda with a group, pounding stakes into my ground, holding signs like they were staging a takeover. She smirked as I approached. "What the hell is this?" I asked. "We're reclaiming this land for the people," she said. "You can't take what's always been ours. The community's taking a stand." I exhaled, staying calm. "Linda, you've lost it. This is private property. You can't protest in my yard." She lifted her chin. "We have a moral right. Try removing us. It'd be a shame, wouldn't it?" "Why's that?" I asked. She grinned, holding up her phone. "We're live streaming. Hundreds are watching you intimidate peaceful protesters. Go ahead, act tough. See how the internet likes it." I clenched my jaw. She wanted me to snap, to give her ammunition. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Great idea, Linda. Hey, everyone, these folks are trespassing on my private land. They've got no right to be here, and if they don't leave, I'm calling the police." Her smirk faltered, but she rallied. "You think the cops will do anything? We're protesting. If you touch us, you're the one getting arrested." "Protesting's fine," I said, "but not on private property. Take it to the sidewalk." She scoffed. "More legal garbage. The people are against you. While you do, call the cops again." "Yeah," I said, dialing in front of her. "Hi. I'd like to report trespassers on my property." They're refusing to leave and building stuff illegally. Can you send someone? Linda's confidence flickered, and some of her group looked uneasy, a few slipping away. She muttered, "This is a joke. You think they'll arrest innocent people?" I shrugged. "Not my problem. They'll decide." 2 patrol cars arrived soon after, 3 officers stepping out. Linda rushed them, arms flailing. "Officers, thank God. This man's kicking us off public land and threatening us." The lead officer, the same one from before, sighed. "Ma'am, we've covered this. This is private property. You're trespassing." "But we have a right," she insisted. "We're standing up for the community." Another officer eyed the stakes. "What's this?" "We're reclaiming what was stolen," Linda said. "That's illegal," he replied. "Tampering with someone's property isn't just trespassing, it's vandalism." Her face paled. "That's ridiculous. We're not damaging anything." The officer pointed at the stakes. "This is property damage. Since it's the 3rd time, we have to escalate." "What does that mean?" she asked, less sure. "It means," he said, "leave now, or face charges for trespassing and damage." Her support crumbled. People bailed, but Linda stood firm. "You can't do this. It's not fair." "Fairness isn't the issue," he said. "It's the law. Leave, or we act." Realizing she was alone, she spat. "Fine, but this isn't over," and stormed off. I smirked as the officers helped remove the stakes. "If she's back," the lead officer said, "press charges." "She's not learning." I nodded. "Will do, thanks." As they left, I felt relief. Linda had failed again, but I knew she'd try something bigger. I was right. Days later, a fake HOA letter arrived, claiming I'd violated rules and demanding I remove structures or face fines. My land wasn't in an HOA. Laughing, I verified with the city it was fraudulent. I filed a report, letting Linda think she'd won. Soon, officers visited me, then her. From my deck, I saw them confront her with the letter. She flailed, but they escorted her to their car. She'd crossed into criminal territory. Word spread. She'd humiliated herself. A week later, a moving truck appeared. She was leaving, defeated. As she loaded her car, she glared at me but said nothing. She drove off, and I finally had peace. Sipping coffee on my deck, I chuckled. She'd lost everything trying to fight a battle she couldn't win. The law prevailed, and she was gone. Victory never tasted so sweet.